Hello friends, this is your friend Bhushan here. I welcome you all to the Next IAS YouTube channel. In this edition of Daily News Analysis, we are going to discuss very important articles that were featured in the Hindu and Indian Express newspapers. Usually, from the perspective of prelims, in the explain section, we are going to discuss few very important articles. First one is new CJI announcement, a very important article. You must know how the Indian Chief Justice Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is appointed. The conventions surrounding it, some controversies, very important article from the perspective of GS2 as well as prelims. In the second article, we are going to discuss AI hallucinations, the new concept regarding AI and the development surrounding it. A very interesting concept, by the way. I am going to discuss some very important terms related to that as well. So new information, new term, from the perspective of prelims, very important. Then third article, which is very important from the perspective of prelims in the explain section, is about WTO Trade Forecast. Very important. Although WTO is forecasting that the global trade is going to be hit due to Trump's tariffs, but from the perspective of prelims, we must know the background of WTO, the history of it, particularly agreement on agriculture and issues surrounding it from the perspective of India is very, very vital issue. Okay. So from the perspective of prelims, you must know the facts clearly. The fourth article, which is also very important, is about olive Ridley turtles. Very interesting species, very interesting nesting habits. We are going to discuss the species overall habitat and the migration patterns and all those things. Very important from the perspective of prelims as well as mains, GS3 environment. Okay. And in the decoded section, we are going to discuss very important editorial which featured in the Indian Express editorial page, that is the fiction of trade balance, or rather I will say balanced trade. Okay. So in this article, we are going to discuss how balanced trade as demanded by Trump is fiction and how India can utilize the opportunities coming up due to the fallouts from the tariff war that is ongoing. So the first important article that we are going to discuss is the announcement of new CJI by the current Chief Justice of India, Sanjeev Khanna. Obviously, he announced Justice B.R. Gavai as next Chief Justice of India. This important article is important from the perspective of prelims. You must know the convention surrounding the CJI's appointment, the collegium process that we have discussed so many times in the daily news analysis already. So you just have to also know about the facts associated with the seat of Chief Justice of India, the history surrounding the seat also. Okay. So we are going to discuss all these things in this particular article. So let's dive into it essentially. So again, the backdrop is, CJI Khanna recommending one of the most senior-most judges currently in the Supreme Court as his successor, that is Justice Gavai. Again, from the perspective of GS2, you must know the important issues in judiciary, the executives, the relationship between executive and judiciary as well. But from the perspective of prelims, you must know the appointment process, overall how the CJI is appointed. Okay. So let's dive into it again. This is, how Indian Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is appointed. Particularly when you look at the constitution, you will find there is no explicit mention about the appointment process. But whatever you find is in Article 124. What that Article 124 says, particularly in clause 1 and 2, it clearly states that there shall be Supreme Court of India consisting of a Chief Justice of India. So in this particular article, there is no mention about the appointment process for the Chief Justice of India. Again, in clause 2, you can see it mentions that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court shall be appointed by the President. So appointed by the President is the only word. And through the collegium system, the interpretation of this particular issue from the perspective of various judges' cases, first, second and third judges' cases, and then the NJC judgment recently and the recent demand by constitutional scholars to actually revive the NJSC. You must have gone through all these collegium related issues in the Supreme Court judges appointment. already, but we are going to discuss some very important issues particular to the post of CJI. So essentially, then if the constitution doesn't mention the appointment process, then how the CJI is appointed in India? So it goes through the conventions. As you know, many times the Indian parliamentary system is essentially adopted from the British system, British Westminster system. So you must have seen that particular constitution is unwritten. Many times that particular constitution works on the conventions, on the history of various Supreme Court or judicial judgments and pronouncements. Okay, but Indian constitution, as we know, is the result of B.R. Ambedkar's huge intellect, and obviously we cannot forget the contribution of other constitutional scholars, leaders associated with it. But it is written. So, but again, everything cannot be written in the constitution. So the conventions have been developed. There are a lot of conventions. So my question to you, just in the comment section, you can mention some of the conventions that you can find, which is not mentioned in the constitutions, but very major conventions that are there, which we as an Indian democratic republic are following from the adoption of the Constitution of India in 1950. Okay. So very interestingly, you can mention some of the conventions. But again, let's see what is the convention in India for appointment of CJI. So essentially, the convention is appointing the senior most judge of the Supreme Court. So the seniority here is not defined by age. You must remember that. Seniority is not by age, but by the number of years a judge has been serving in the top court of the country. Okay. So age is not an issue, but the number of years is counted while counting the seniority of the judge to be appointed as a CJI, okay, Chief Justice of India. Particularly, the memorandum of procedure in this regard clearly mentions that the appointment of CJI and SC judges, the law ministry seeks the recommendation of outgoing CJI about the next appointment. So essentially, what the memorandum of procedure clearly states is, for the next CJI appointment, the current law ministry seek the name from the current CJI. Okay. So the letter from the government kickstarts the appointment process. You know that that letter that the ministry sends to the CJI kickstarts the next CJI's appointment process. So the most judge of the apex court is considered fit to hold the office of CJI. So generally, under the MOP, normally the CJI, current CJI recommends the second most senior judge as his successor. Okay, this is generally the procedure. This is generally the conventions. But let's see some controversies regarding the appointment process of CJI. Very important, very interesting, and I'm going to tell you the story of one of the most fearless judge of the Supreme Court, who happens to be an uncle of current CJI, that is Sanjeev Khanna. So stay tuned. So let's see when this convention has been broken in the past. So particularly, you can see in 1964, Gajendra Gadkar J superseded Imam J, who was seriously unwell. So this is particularly, due to the illness, that particular judge was superseded by another in 1964. But in 1973 and 77, essentially the regime of Indira Gandhi and the subsequent emergency period actually led to very tumultuous period in the judiciary's history, overall history. It is actually marked by the conflict between the executive branch and the judicial branch, essentially culminating in the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi superseding three most senior judges in the Supreme Court, Justices J.M. Shelard, Justice K.S. Hegde and A.N. Grover. Superseding all these senior most judges, she appointed Justice A.N. Ray as the next CJI. Particularly, this is in 1973 in the wake of Keshwanand Bharati judgment. So essentially, obviously, this is against the convention. One of those three senior most judges resigned in protest. Okay, But the next convention that was broken is in the period of emergency in 1977. In that particular period, Justice M.H. Baig was appointed over CJI, as a CJI over Justice H.R. Khanna. So, as I am telling you earlier, I am going to tell you the story of Justice H.R. Khanna. Very important. In the judicial history, Justice H.R. Khanna is considered one of the most fearless judges who actually upheld the integrity of the judiciary. At the same time, he upheld the fundamental right to life for whole of Indian citizens. So essentially, let's look into some of his achievements, I will say. Okay, as I said, he is one of the most fearless judges of the Supreme Court at that point of time. What he did was he gave the dissenting minority opinion in the ADM Jabalpur case. So you must be knowing what is this ADM Jabalpur case. It is essentially the case which challenged our traditional sort of understanding of right to life. So in the time of emergency, whether the Indian citizens have the right to approach Supreme Court or even High Court when the right to life is threatened or not. That is the basic question in ADM Jabalpur case. Various High Court judgments gave the opinion that even in the case of national emergency, right to life is operational. People can approach the judiciary to uphold their right to life under Article 21. But in the infamous ADM Jabalpur case, Supreme Court clearly mentioned that the right to life and the suspension to approach judiciary in national emergency is essentially void. Okay, that means you cannot approach the judiciary for upholding the right to life. This is one of the most egregious judgments at that point of time given by judiciary. The only dissenting opinion is given by none other than Justice H.R. Khanna. And again, due to the result of that, he was superseded to become a next CJI by the Indira Gandhi government. So essentially, this act particularly and his dissent in that particular case is legendary. He upheld the right to life and liberty. Essentially, it is the heart of fundamental rights in the darkness of emergency. So, H.R. Khanna, his contribution is immense in that regard. So, let's move forward and see the role of government. Again, the law ministry, it is essentially guided by the memorandum of procedure. As I earlier mentioned, the government has very minimal role. It is essentially following the memorandum of procedure. So what is the tenure of CJI? So the tenure of CJI is until they attain the age of 65 years. So you see, in this particular case, in the current case of CJI, of our next CJI, that is Justice B.R. Gavai. By the way, his name is also Bhushan. So his particular tenure will be just around 6 months. So he will retire in the November 2025 mostly. Again, the issue is the upper age limit is fixed. That is 65 for Indian CJI. But in some other jurisdiction like United States Supreme Court, can you tell me in the comment section what is the upper limit or age limit for the appointment or for the retirement for the Supreme Court judge of, say, US? Okay, very interesting question. So just comment in the comment section regarding that. Okay, so how CJI is removed? This particular thing has been covered so many times in daily news analysis videos as well. So essentially, the removal is through the impeachment process. So you must be knowing the impeachment process. So we are not going to go too detailed, go into too detail about that particular thing here. So let's see some of the most important facts when it comes to CJI. Okay, the post of CJI. Very interestingly, in recent pattern of UPSC prelims, you may see this particular thing of UPSC moving more towards the objective questions. So you must have the objective knowledge in polity. You must know the constitutional history, some important judgments, some case laws, etc. as well. Okay, so let's see some facts about the representation in Supreme Court or in the post of CJI overall. So who is the first CJI of India? Can you tell me? Essentially, Justice Kania was the first Chief Justice of India. Who are some of the female judges of the Supreme Court? By the way, yet we don't have female Chief Justice of India, but hopefully we are going to see our first CJI, women CJI, female CJI in 2027. B.V. Nagaratna is going to be the first Chief Justice of India. Very important, very encouraging news for Indian judiciary overall, and the representation in Indian judiciary, which is always somewhat of an issue. Okay, particularly some of the famous women Supreme Court judges are Fatima Bibi. She was the judge in 90s. Currently, we have two female Supreme Court judges like Bela Trivedi and B.V. Nagaratna. So essentially, out of 34, we have the representation. As you can see, what is the percentage of representation? So we need to have more female judges in the Supreme Court for the sake of, obviously, the representation, at the same time viewpoint diversity in the Supreme Court as well. So what about say the oppressed caste representation in the Supreme Court? So judges from the scheduled caste, can you tell me some of the judges which are there from the scheduled tribe particularly, or scheduled caste? First we discuss about scheduled caste representation. Currently, P.B. Varale is the Supreme Court judge who is from the scheduled caste community. Also, you can see Justice Gavai and C.T. Ravikumar are other judges from the scheduled caste. Particularly when it comes to CJI and the representation of scheduled caste community, we have Justice K.G. Balkrishnan, who is the first Dalit to be appointed as a CJI. Then now we will have Justice Gavai, who is from the scheduled caste community. He will be the second scheduled caste community person to be appointed as a CJI. What about scheduled tribes? Then we will have the only example of Justice H.K. Sema, who is from the scheduled tribes. Very important from the perspective of prelims. You must know the facts. So this is the practice question for you. Comment your answer in the comment section. Let's discuss very important second article that we are going to discuss is about AI hallucinations. The title, aptly gives the whole idea about this article. Does AI still hallucinating, or is it becoming more reliable? So, you must be using AI in your day-to-day life. Most of the time, the prompts you give to AI, actually, your expectation, what is your expectation? You expect to get the right answer, obviously, which is factually correct, which is consistent with the AI's earlier answers. Particularly ChatGPT, we are using ChatGPT, DeepSeek and whatnot. Many other AI models currently. What exactly AI hallucinations mean is essentially it is incorrect or misleading results that AI models generate. Very important, very interesting article. So you must have seen, for some of your prompts, AI giving wrong answers. So essentially it is hallucinating. It is becoming naturally overconfident. Why does it happen? What we can do about it? We are going to discuss in this particular article. Obviously, the relevance is for, science and technology in GS3. From the perspective of prelims, you must know the term and its meaning. Okay. So let's dive into it. Particularly, let me tell you the example that is mentioned in the article to explain this AI hallucinations effectively. So what the researchers asked OpenAI's DALL-E. DALL-E is obviously image generator, you must know, the image generator version of ChatGPT in short. Okay. So DALL-E, it was asked to generate a picture of a room with no elephant in it. Very interestingly, but what DALL-E gave is it gave the image which contained a large picture of an elephant, while the other contained both the picture and a miniature elephant statue. So instead of giving the right answer, the right image, it actually gave the opposite image to the prompt. So why does it happen? What is the reason behind such AI hallucinations? You can say that AI is becoming overconfident. So many times you must have seen, when someone is overconfident, they always tend to factually incorrect sometimes. Okay, so why particularly these AI hallucinations occur is because obviously too complicated questions. So the AI which is prepared, AI prompts which the models that are prepared to answer your prompts, like like that of ChatGPT, are essentially focused on your prompts, which are in a very simplistic knowledge. There is no ingrained or complex thinking behind it per se. But when such complex and ingrained thinking, connecting concepts and other critical prompts are given to AI, they tend to misbehave or give factually incorrect, inconsistent reply. That is because obviously the complexity of your own prompt. That is one reason. But again, AI are essentially, these AI models, particularly like ChatGPT, are essentially, constantly evolving. We have seen, different versions of ChatGPT. There is 3.5, there is 4. You must be using 4, particularly essentially when it comes to more accuracy and consistency. Obviously ChatGPT is becoming more accurate, it is less hallucinating. But again, in the article you will find the data regarding that ChatGPT 3.5 was way much more hallucinating compared to ChatGPT 4. Still, even ChatGPT 4 hallucinates. Why does it happen? Is because the training that happens of these models, is the data itself is very limited. So you can see there is a gap between the data that we feed to the AI model and the constantly changing and evolving nature of the data itself. Okay, so essentially what we can do about it, how we can reduce the AI hallucinations. Obviously, training AI models with more data is one option to it. See, more data, essentially, that's why it is said that data is the new oil. That is the primary reason, that data essentially, these AI models are consuming a lot of data, and the more data you give these AI models, they will generate much more accurate and much more consistent results. So accuracy and consistency both will come with more accurate and more enhanced data. Okay, we can develop some other models, SLM models, for example, small language models, SLMs. So what are these? Essentially, SLM is more efficient version of LLMs. It is designed to do certain very specific tasks. Okay, tasks such as reasoning, reading, comprehension, math problem, etc., etc. So there are SLM models like chatbots. Then we have models like Microsoft Orca 2. You must know some other models of SLMs as well. Normally LLMs everyone knows, but SLM is often ignored entity, I will say. What other thing we can do is implementing the retrieval augmented generation technique. See, this particular term is important, SLM, RAG. What exactly is the meaning of these terms? You must know from the perspective of prelims. So what is this RAG technique? Here an AI model produces output by retrieving information from specific database relevant to a particular query. Okay, so in this particular techniques, essentially what AI model will give answer to your prompt is essentially they prompt again to the next source. For example, if you ask AI any question, AI model any question, they may provide you a link to any Wikipedia page article on artificial intelligence. Okay, so this is one example of it. So essentially prompting you to another reliable source. This is the meaning of RAG. RAG in turn means retrieval augmented generation. What other thing we can do is training AI models in curriculum learning. This curriculum, what is the meaning of curriculum learning? Is essentially training AI on a much shorter sentences first, and then we can switch to more complex sentences. As I said earlier, most of the time AI hallucinate because of your prompt. If your prompt is very complex, very critical, which needs critical thinking in the first place, it tends to hallucinate. Means it tends to give wrong factual information to it. Okay, So these are some, in this particular slide, we are discussing some other AI related terms which are often in news. So just go through them. For example, generative AI, you must be knowing. Our AGI, ChatGPT models, you obviously already know about it. This particularly GAN is important term, generative adversarial network. So what exactly is this? So it composed of two neural networks to generate new data. So essentially GAN is a neural network, okay. So but it contains two neural networks. The one is generator and another is discriminator. Essentially what is the work of generator is it creates new content, and what is the work of discriminator is it checks to see whether it is authentic or not. Very interestingly, that's what is called GAN, okay. Then LLMs, you already know. SLMs I just discussed. What are some other models of SLMs? Like we have Phi 3.5, like Gemma 2, etc., etc. Okay. So SLM and their models are also emerging very fast. So you must know few of these models. Again, these are some very important AI related terms. Just go through them. Okay. Then, from the perspective of prelims, we must know AI regulations. What are some conventions, norms the various countries are adopting to control the spread or to regulate AI, I will rather say. Then first we have, Japan's social principles of human centric AI. Essentially, Japan is obviously one of the technological leader in AI. They have come up with some social principles which focuses essentially on humanistic approach like fairness, accountability, transparency, innovation. These are some basis of that particular approach. Then we have Europe's AI Act. Particularly this Bletchley Declaration by AI Safety Summit is important. This Bletchley Declaration you can get directly in the prelims as well. So like, what can be the question? Let me ask you the question itself. So Bletchley Declaration is related to what? That can be the question. So obviously you must know it is related to controlling or rather regulating the spread of AI. Okay. Global efforts like, obviously very important is India's effort in that regard with global partnership. That is global partnership on AI, GPAI, that was held in 23. Essentially that is, GPAI was actually started in that summit in Delhi itself. India is obviously a founding member of it. Okay. There are various UN resolutions on artificial intelligence which supports safe, secure and trustworthy AI developments. See, AI is going to affect the whole economy, the whole of global humanity tremendously in coming future. Many, AI scientists are warning us about the threats emerging from AI. We have seen various movies based on AI, essentially, which, obviously project some dystopian future. But again, we have to be optimistic. The future is AI. We have to focus on the regulation part of it. What are some Indian efforts in that regard? See, we don't have the specific AI related regulation or law yet. But currently what we have is India's very important Digital Data Protection Act, which was passed in 2023. In coming future, we will have the rules implemented as well. The rules haven't been actually declared yet, rather. So the privacy concerns emanating from the AI is addressed through DPDP Act. Okay. Then we have Niti Aayog strategy, AI for all strategy by Niti Aayog. So what is the focus of this particular strategy is it features AI R&D guidelines which focuses on agriculture, healthcare, education, smart cities, infrastructure, etc. So essentially, considering the transformative nature of AI, the Niti Aayog is coming up with this particular strategy. Okay, there is, they have also declared or rather given principles for responsible AI. So responsible AI is something emerging as a theme of all these AI related regulations in India. So this particular question, this DOL E has been asked in the UPSC prelims already. So just go through the question and answer the obvious question in the comment section. Okay. So the third important article that we are going to discuss is about WTO forecast for trade. So what and why this article is important is because from the perspective of prelims, you must know the history of WTO, the various conventions associated with it. Particularly the agreement on agriculture, as I earlier mentioned, is very, very important. The de minimis clause, the peace clause, these words are very important. You must know the meaning of them. Okay, and some factual information regarding that. So let's dive into it. See, it is important. WTO reforms is often asked in economy section of GS3 as well. International relations, international organizations in GS2 are often asked as well. So essentially, let's see the theme of this article. So what the WTO says in Global Trade Forecast 2025 is the merchandise trade is going to decline by 0.2%. This is huge sort of a decline. Why I am saying this is because earlier the same forecast projected at the start of obviously 2025, before this tariff or insanity by Trump administration, that trade will grow by almost 3%. But current projection is that it will decline, merchandise trade in particular will decline by 0.2% in the near future. So what are some reasons for this downward revision by WTO? So what obviously one of the reason is the reciprocal tariff announcement by the Trump and the uncertainty due to that. Okay. See, the combined impact could result in a total decline of 1.5% in world merchandise trade. Very huge decline that is. So, and the situation will be much more dire if the US goes ahead with the reciprocal tariff. Currently, the tariffs have been on pause for 90 days. But again, you never know what will happen with the Trump administration. Unpredictability is the trademark of this particular Trump administration. Okay. So, similar is the outlook by UNCTADs as well. So, UNCTAD is essentially a UN trade organization. So, let's see some, behind facts, the WTO related factoids in this particular slide. Okay. So, WTO, headquarters, you must know it is headquartered in Geneva, established in 1995, 1 January 1995. Although we have the predecessor GATT, we are going to discuss that as well briefly, but the WTO is created through Uruguay round negotiations. So, these facts, UPSC can ask these facts because WTO, as we know, is always in news. Membership, most of the countries are members. Around 166, 98% of the global trade is subsumed under WTO. So, essentially GATT, you can see the history here. GATT is there, which was established in way back in 1948. It is a temporary trade pact signed in 1947 rather, but it came into force in 1948. Obviously, it is aimed at reducing tariffs. See, at that point of time, the world is going through the transformation, the post World War II transformation, I will rather say. So many times the institutions are still building, which are currently the part of global governance. Okay. So initially this GATT functioned without legal status. It is limited to goods trade. It does not involve services trade. So there are various rounds, there is Tokyo, Uruguay round as well, etc. So, this particular pact was converted to WTO through Marrakesh Agreement in 1994. Essentially, it started on 1 January 1995. Okay. What are some successors to GATT? Currently, the WTO covers obviously merchandise trade as well as the services trade as well, along with IPR, TRIPS. That is also a very important area, but we are not going to discuss the TRIPS agreement here. Okay. So we are just going to focus on the WTO aspect of it. Okay. Obviously, Uruguay round I already mentioned. So what are some functions of WTO? You can go through the functions. Very important. Essentially, WTO is an anchor which is the base of rules-based global trade. Okay. So essentially, it is a forum for trade negotiation. It is monitoring national trade policies. It cooperates with other international organizations. It is also provides technical assistance and training for developing countries. It very important, it handles trade disputes. There is, a very important controversy regarding that. The WTO trade dispute body, it is not functional currently because essentially the USA has stonewalled the appointments in that particular body, essentially making it dysfunctional. Okay, so that particular issue is there, which is still there in from the last 5 to 6 years. So, and there is very important WTO Trade Agreement Administration. Okay, so these are some functions of WTO. So let's see what exactly is this agreement on agriculture. So what the agreement on agriculture mentions is it actually reforms the global agricultural trade. It tries to reduce the trade distorting subsidies that is affecting the global agri markets essentially. So this agreement on agriculture came into effect with the Marrakesh Agreement in 1995. One of the foremost things about this agreement on agriculture is, as I said, it mentioned, or it tried to regulate some of the trade distorting subsidies. Okay, so what are some subsidies which are allowed, not allowed? Very important from the perspective of prelims. In this particular chart, you can see, okay, we have green box subsidies, which is obviously not trade distorting, which affects, or which has very minimum or no trade distorting effect at all. It is allowed without limits. So what are the examples for green box subsidies? Is R&D expenditure, food security, environmental programs are part of green box subsidy. What is amber box? See, amber box is essentially a trade distorting subsidy which must be regulated. So it is regulated. So amber, often, India's MSP is considered, minimum support price regime is considered as a part of amber box subsidy. So it is regulated. Often we will see, most of the time countries complaining about this particular MSP regime, and WTO and India actually invoking peace clause. So what is this peace clause? Peace clause is essentially the clause which temporarily exempts certain domestic support measures from being challenged in WTO for developing countries, obviously. Okay. By the way, in WTO particular parlance, the declaration of whether the country is developing or developed is the self-declaration. So essentially, any country can claim itself as a developing country or developed country. There are no fixed criteria. It is just a self-declaratory note. Okay, just remember that point, very important. So what are blue box subsidies? Essentially, these are trade distorting but tied to production limiting programs. So these are, comparatively less trade distorting, which are allowed. Subsidies for limiting crop areas. Most of the time, this particular subsidy is misutilized by the Western countries, particularly US, which gives ample support to its own farmers, but complain when India does the same. Okay. So here we discuss the de minimis clause, which is very important from the perspective of agreement on agriculture for you. So what is this clause exactly? So for a developed country, if they do not exceed 5% of the total value of the production, but of what? It refers to the subsidies that are small enough, that are not seem to be trade distorting. So essentially, how much subsidies can developed countries give? It should not exceed 5% of the value of total production. But for developing countries, it is 10%. So you must know this fact. Okay. And India argues that India's MSP regime is in this de minimis clause under 10%. But obviously, this particular issue is there, and many countries complain about India's MSP regime a lot. Okay. What are some publications of WTO? Global Trade Outlook and Statistics. This is what currently whatever we discussed about the trade forecast is part of Global Trade Outlook and Statistics. Sometimes in prelims you will have these reports and the organization which publishes those reports. You must know these particular facts. So essentially very important. So this is practical question on WTO. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Okay. The next important article that we are going to discuss is about olive Ridley turtles. Very interesting creatures. You must have seen their nesting sites, their nesting habits so many times already. Okay. So why this particular news is there in Indian Express is because one olive Ridley turtle actually traveled for 4,500 kilometers, obviously, through the ocean surrounding India, through the ocean water surrounding India. This is a remarkable 4,500 kilometer journey from Odisha to Maharashtra, from coast to coast. Very interestingly, it is, it shows that that particular turtle actually nested on Ratnagiri beach. Okay, generally we consider olive ridley turtles, are a mass nesting species of turtles. Okay, but and that particular terms you must know, Aribada. Aribada is the term for mass nesting sites. Okay, most of these sites are in Odisha. There are some sites in Maharashtra as well, as I said, some sites in Andaman and Nicobar Islands as well. But Odisha is the hub for it. Okay, but this particular turtle travel for 4,500 kilometers from coast to coast to nest singularly on that Ratnagiri beach. Very interesting, very remarkable creature. It is a feat of migration for this particular species. Importance, relevance, it is relevant from the perspective of prelims. You must know the species, the status of the species, the turtle, turtle versus tortoise. What are some other tortoise species? There are terrapins as well. So we are going to see how turtles are different from terrapins and they are different from tortoises. Okay. So very interesting article from the perspective of prelims. As I said, these are some mass nesting sites. We already discussed what is Aribada and all those things. And this particular, graph here, map here, directly shows the route that is taken by that particular tortoise. So essentially, it actually, traveled from thousands of miles from Odisha's coast to Maharashtra's coast. Okay, and it laid eggs on the Maharashtra's Guhagar beach, which is in Ratnagiri. Around 125 eggs were laid. Okay, so essentially, let's see some background of this particular species. Olive ridley turtles, what are some nesting habits, what are its eating habits and all those things. India is, one of the few places in the world where nesting happens frequently. These are omnivorous species. Many times you will have this particular question in prelims as well, that some species are some species of turtles are omnivorous. So it is always right. Okay. So these are omnivorous species, obviously eat jellyfish and all those things. It is listed as vulnerable by IUCN. So you must know the status of this particular species. Olive ridley turtles are vulnerable. You remember that. Okay, here we mentioned some threats. What are some threats for these species? Obviously, coastal developments, marine pollution, entanglement in fishing nets is another reason for, particularly the use of trawl nets is one of the reasons for the decline in this in the number of species, number of olive ridley turtles. Essentially, climate change, is again one of the reasons. Stray dogs is another reason, because many times, these stray dogs, these stray animals, even the birds attack those olive ridley, infants, I will say. So what are some protection measures we have taken? So obviously it has been mentioned under WPA, World Wildlife Protection Act, Schedule 1 species in 1972. Then we have turtle excluser devices. So what are these devices? It is essentially installed in trawler, which encourages, which essentially, what it does is essentially excludes these turtle species. Okay. Obviously trawlers here means those nets. Okay. Special protection during nesting season. Many times, even the police protection is also given to these nesting sites in Odisha particularly. So as I earlier said, we are going to discuss the difference between turtles, tortoise and terrapins. Okay. So what exactly are turtles? Turtles are mostly aquatic. They are, found in oceans, rivers, obviously. But tortoise is fully land dwelling. You must know this. Turtle, fully aquatic. Tortoise, fully land dwelling animal. But terrapin is somewhere in between. It is semi-aquatic. It is found in brackish waters as well. And it can survive on land as well. Okay. Here it mentions shell shape, not that much important. Diet is very important, very vital. So, turtles are all omnivorous species. Tortoise are mostly herbivores. Okay, the mostly word is very, very vital. And again, terrapins are omnivorous. The lifespan you can see, the turtles normally 20 to 80 years, tortoise 80 to 150 plus years, terrapins are 30 to 60 years. Some examples of turtles, olive ridley turtle is there, leatherback is there, green turtles are there. Okay. What are some examples of tortoises? Tortoises, very famous Galapagos tortoises, Indian star tortoise and Indian, what is the example of terrapin say? Indian pond terrapin. Okay. I'm going to now tell you the very interesting story of Lonesome George, which is not a turtle species, it is a tortoise species. Okay. So essentially what happened is in 1970s, the Galapagos Island, as you know, very famous islands where, from where the Darwin got his inspiration to actually publish his scientific theory or scientific theory of survival of the fittest and all those things. So that particular island has essentially it is an island off the coast of Ecuador and essentially in South America. So in that particular island, the goat species, the feral goat species was introduced, and these goat species actually devastated the islands completely. On one particular island called Pinta Island, the devastation is so tremendous that whole of the subspecies of Pinta Island tortoise was actually destroyed by the goats. So this is very interesting, another species destroying other very interesting endemic native species. But in 1971, only one species of, that Pinta Island tortoise, subspecies of Galapagos Island tortoise was found. That one species is the singular species of that particular subspecies. So essentially, obviously, considering the threats, that particular tortoise was moved to a protected location. Okay, but after 100 years, after living for 100 years singularly in that particular enclosure, in that particular park in Galapagos Islands, it died in 2012. Lonely essentially. That's why he was given the moniker Lonesome George. Very interestingly, that species was functionally extinct. It is a subspecies of Galapagos tortoise, but it is essentially reminds us of the impact we have, impact as a human species have on the overall, viability of biodiversity, that tremendous biodiversity Earth possesses. Very interesting. It is a reminder to protect the biodiverse Earth. Very interesting. The story of Lonesome George is very, very heart-wrenching, I will say. So, Gahir Mata, as I earlier mentioned, Gahir Mata Wildlife Sanctuary, Marine Sanctuary is the foremost site for these olive ridley turtles. So, let's come back to the turtles now. So, you can see here the feature of this particular marine sanctuary. It has been declared and it is close to Bhitarkanika National Park. Okay. So, as I said, Bhitarkanika National Park is also there, which is also one of the, nesting sites. Bhitarkanika, one of there are also Indian crocodile species, which is very famous in Bhitarkanika National Park. And it is also the second largest mangrove ecosystem in India, after obviously Sundarbans. So, see, let's discuss some other very important turtle and tortoise species which are found in India. Olive ridleys are there. There is also green sea turtle, which is IUCN endangered species. Okay, you just have to remember the IUCN status of these species and whether they are found in India or not. Obviously, we are discussing here the species which are found in Indian waters as well, Indian waters and Indian, obviously, rivers, etc. So, rivers and coastal waters. Okay, hawksbill turtle is also found. It is critically endangered. You must know this fact. Okay, hawksbill turtles are critically endangered species. And obviously, this habitat is coral reefs. So, why these hawksbill turtles are getting, destroyed is because of the destruction of coral reefs as well. That can be inferred from this particular information here. Okay, there is loggerhead turtle as well, which is, again vulnerable like olive ridley turtles. Then we have Indian flapshell turtle is there, Indian roof turtle, see, you must have seen Indian star tortoise. You must have seen this species in many zoos, which are displayed as well. Most of the time, these Indian star tortoises are very much interesting, very cute species of tortoises. The species is vulnerable. Red crowned roofed turtle, which it is critically endangered. So, what you can do in this particular case is you must know the species which are critically endangered. So, just remember the species of turtles and tortoises which are critically endangered under IUCN. So, whenever you have to have the hint, or in prelims particularly, it is about clicks. So, if you remember these particular species, very few species which are there, which are critically endangered, you will able to answer or guess the answer effectively. Very important from the perspective of prelims is also Convention on Migratory Species, CMS Convention. It is also called as Bonn Convention, and it entered into force in 1983. India has actually adopted this convention way back. There are two appendices. You can go through these appendices, what is the meaning of it, and some species involved in these appendices. Okay, India, as I said, it has actually signed a non-legally binding Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with CMS on conservation and management of Siberian cranes. So, another important species from the perspective of prelims is Siberian crane, which is migratory species of bird. Marine turtles, again, obviously it is about olive Ridley turtles. There is dugong as well, and there is raptors as well. Okay, so India has collaborated and signed an MOUs with CMS as well. So, go through this previous year's question, which is asked in 2019. Very interesting question, very important question. Generally, you will be able to answer it correctly in the comment section. Okay. So, in decoded section, we are going to discuss one very important editorial that was featured in the Indian Express editorial page, that is titled Fiction of a Balanced Trade. Obviously, it talks about tariffs and trade again. A lot of the time the articles are getting repeated, I know, but just bear with me on this article particularly. There are some interesting ideas which are given in the article, but combine this article with the WTO article that we mentioned in the explain section, and very importantly, both these articles will give you perspective for prelims on global trade, as well as from the perspective of mains. WTO reform is the area which is very, very vital. We have the question which is PYQ, which is asked in 2018. At that point of time, the world is going through the same thing, not as intense like today. But again, the question is about WTO reforms. So you must know the reform areas in WTO. We didn't discuss the reforms in WTO. That is the section for another episode of DNA, because it is very huge. But I mentioned some of the issues with WTO already. Okay, so let's dive into the article. So what this particular article argues is the global conditions created by US reciprocal tariff threat. Obviously, it represents the challenges as well as great opportunities for India. And the article essentially argues that India should capitalize on these opportunities. See, Trump has paused those tariffs for 90 days. Obviously, most of the countries are rushing to actually get the deal done. Obviously, Trump, as we know, he's a master of deal. He has written the art of deal already. Let's see how much he's able to go through with these deals. And in 90 days, we are going to see whether the world changes again and goes into turmoil again or not. Obviously, China is a different case altogether when it comes to US. Okay. In recent times, US has, reciprocally threatened China again and again. Now, the current reciprocal tariff rate on China is 245%. Can you imagine 245% of tariff on Chinese imports into US? Very, very shocking sort of trade scenario here. What is its relevance? From the perspective of GS2 and GS3, important article. So, this article particularly also gives the idea about BOP, balance of payment. It talks about current account deficit, trade deficit as well. So, those terms are very important. So, you must know the meaning of those terms and what is involved in, or what are some constituents while counting the deficits in that regard. Okay, so just answer, just comment your answer in the comment section for this particular question. We are not going to discuss BOP here. Okay, we are going to discuss, we are going to focus on this particular article, okay, from the perspective of mains, obviously. So, as I mentioned earlier, development so far, I have already mentioned 10% the base tariffs are already there, which was the earliest move by the Trump administration. Then we have the reciprocal tariff announcement. So reciprocal tariffs have been put off for 90 days, but that 10% tariffs are still there. So what is that? Essentially some countries retaliated immediately, but some countries, are essentially negotiating the trade deals with the US now. Okay. So, that is the development so far. So why, particularly Trump is so much focused on balanced trade? See, the reasoning behind the Trump's focus or Trump's obsession with tariffs and imbalanced trade is that in the process of globalization, he argues, is US is the loser. Essentially, all sort of countries which are doing trade with US are ripping the countries off. They are not balancing the trade, merchandise trade in particular. His argument is that due to this particular, event of globalization and the related, expansion of trade with China's entry into the global trade actually destroys the American manufacturing sector. That is very true. In some of the heartlands of US, we have seen the manufacturing getting shifted to low tariff countries, to low labor cost countries like China, Vietnam, etc. So the Trump is trying to rebalance that trade. Okay, so essentially, particularly he's focused on merchandise trade. That's why you see when it comes to India, he only imposed tariffs on Indian merchandise trade, not on Indian exports. Very important, very interesting to note here. So, but the author here argues this obsession with balanced trade is fiction. Why is he saying so? Essentially, trade deficit, it reflects the imbalance between national savings and domestic investment. Very true. It reflects the difference, the imbalance between national savings and domestic investments. So essentially, whenever there are fluctuations in national savings and domestic investments, you will also have the trade deficit impact as well, which is not necessarily due to the trade with other nations. To handle this particular, or to handle the growth properly, to support growth, most of the countries resort to long periods of low interest rate with accommodative monetary policy. Recently we have seen the RBI cutting the repo rate and changing its stance to accommodative. In turn, what it does is with large deficit budgets, fiscal expansion can reduce national savings rate. As I earlier said, the savings rate is the result of all these factors and it reflects in the trade and current account deficit as well. So essentially, it is not just about the bilateral trade. So essentially, it is a fiction. That's what the author argues. Essentially, it is the imbalance in trade per se itself is not bad. Okay. So essentially, what are some challenges for India in this regard? So challenges for India is obviously the trade uncertainty, the global trade uncertainty often affects India's exports. See, in global trade, India's exports, how much it contributes is around 2%. We have to increase our global exports, particularly merchandise exports. Again, we have to revive our own manufacturing sector, which has been stuck around 16 to 17% of GDP. So essentially, let's see some challenges for India in this particular scenario. What are some challenges for India? Obviously, the global tariff threat and the uncertainties create the whole sort of problems in itself. Okay, a risk to Indian exports cannot be discounted. Rather, whenever there is uncertainty, we will have the growth projections getting affected due to that. So global uncertainty is always, growth needs policy certainty. That's what the issue is. So rising competition with ultra cheap Chinese goods. You must be knowing, obviously the China is threatened with 245% of US reciprocal tariffs. Now it is looking for newer markets. So essentially that's why Xi Jinping recently visited many Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN members as well, and he is pushing to expand the trade between ASEAN and China, because essentially he has to find the newer markets for China to compensate for the loss of US market. So and these Chinese made goods are ultra cheap, so India has to be competitive in that particular market. It has to compete with Chinese goods in that regard, and that is a challenge for India, as we know how cheap the Chinese are. That is pun intended here. Amid chaos, there is an opportunity. That's what the article argues. Essentially, there is a possibility of decline in the cost of imported goods and components associated with it. So essentially, whenever we import, our import cost will also decrease with obviously this uncertainty in trade and the ultra cheap goods from China, which will reduce inflationary pressure on Indian economy. So essentially, it may have the negative effect on inflation, negative effects on inflation. It may reduce the inflation. That means it may enhance the space for monetary policy to become more accommodative to support growth. That's what the RBI has done recently. RBI has essentially switched to support India's economic growth, which is very vital for the job growth as well. Because inflation is under control. So monetary policy can focus more on growth through its accommodative stance. Increased investment. India is well positioned to attract some of the businesses. Obviously, the Apple, Apple or Tesla, even Tesla has huge factories in China. India can be a good destination, good investment destination for these sort of companies. Just it has to reorient its policies in such a way that they can attract the India and Indian shores can attract these global companies which are fleeing China essentially. But what we can do in this particular scenario in a short term, we have to come to agreement with US for a short-term trade deal. So in 90 days, very important, we have to come up with the trade. See, what US is demanding is US is demanding the concession for its own agricultural products in Indian agricultural market. So essentially, obviously, but again, and US is using the leverage of using the leverage of service sector exports of India to actually force the hand of India on the agricultural reforms here. So essentially, see, from post 1991 liberalization, the only area where India has failed, or one of the areas where India has failed to reform is agriculture. We have seen many times even 3 agricultural laws getting passed, then quashed again after the farmers protest, etc. So agriculture reforms, now India is forced to do those agricultural reforms. So that is a positive for India according to the article. So essentially, but India has to expand its trade agreements with other trading groups like EU, ASEAN, CPTPP or Mercosur. Mercosur is particularly a trade grouping of South American countries. Okay, so very importantly, we have to have our trade basket expanded, our trade destinations expanded to these shores as well. So, but most importantly, it has to lower now the average tariff rates so that it can attract the investments properly. Okay. So this article, effectively challenges the current wisdom of India sticking to its tariff rates. It argues about lowering of tariff rates. But again, this is the practice question based on that particular article. Very interesting question. So what are some opportunities and challenges for India in this particular scenario? You can always answer in the comment section. So this is it in this edition of Daily News Analysis. Please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.